It was supposed to be the perfect vacation. Emma had been looking forward to it for months, excited about the idea of getting away with her husband, David, and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. They had planned this trip to a tropical island, a place with clear blue waters, sandy beaches, and the promise of warm, relaxing days. Emma couldn't wait to spend some quality time with her little family, away from the stress of everyday life. David, a devoted husband and father, was always full of energy. He had spent weeks researching the best places to visit on the island, making sure everything would be just right. From the moment they landed, the excitement was palpable. Lily's laughter echoed through the hotel as she ran around with her beach ball, while Emma smiled, watching them both. The hotel they stayed at was beautiful. It had wide, open spaces and a huge swimming pool. The beach was just a short walk away, and Emma and David spent hours building sandcastles with Lily. It felt like the perfect escape from their busy lives back home. They ate delicious food at local restaurants, went on boat rides, and explored the island's hidden caves. Lily loved every minute of it, her face lighting up with excitement every time they discovered something new. But little did Emma know, this was the last time she would ever see her husband and daughter together. As the days passed, the trio grew closer, enjoying every moment of the trip. There were no signs of anything wrong, no hint of danger lurking nearby. Everything was perfect. Emma felt so grateful for this rare opportunity to truly connect with her family. It was the kind of vacation that created memories to last a lifetime. On the morning of the third day, David suggested they go on a guided tour of the island's famous jungle. He and Lily were always up for an adventure, and Emma, feeling a little hesitant but trusting her family, agreed. They packed their bags, grabbed sunscreen, and set off. The tour guide was friendly and informative, leading them through the thick green foliage. They saw exotic birds and colorful butterflies, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and damp earth. That evening, after returning to the hotel, Emma and David were exhausted but happy. They put Lily to bed and sat together on the balcony, enjoying the warm breeze and the sound of the ocean waves crashing in the distance. It was a peaceful moment, and Emma couldn't help but think about how lucky they were to have each other. The next morning, Emma woke up to a strange silence. The sun was shining, but there was something unsettling about the stillness. She found Lily's room empty, and when she went to check on David, he was also missing. At first, she thought they had simply gone out for an early walk, but hours passed, and there was no sign of either of them. As panic started to settle in, Emma contacted the hotel staff. They searched the hotel and the surrounding areas, but found nothing. She called the local authorities, but still, there was no trace. It was as if her family had vanished into thin air, leaving Emma alone in the hotel room, confused and terrified. As hours turned into an entire day with no sign of David or Lily, Emma's worry deepened. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was just some misunderstanding. Maybe David had taken Lily on a spontaneous adventure, or perhaps they'd decided to explore the island on their own. But when evening fell and they still hadn't returned, her heart sank. The island, which had once felt so peaceful and beautiful, now seemed foreign and cold. The hotel staff had already started searching, but it seemed like everyone was just going through the motions. Emma could see the uncertainty in their eyes, as if they weren't sure what to do next. She couldn't sit still anymore. She needed answers. She ran to the front desk and demanded that they contact the local authorities. After what felt like an eternity, a few officers arrived. They were calm but seemed unsure of where to start. They asked her a lot of questions about the family's routine, their last known whereabouts, and if there had been any signs of trouble before they went missing. But Emma had no answers. She tried to explain how David and Lily had been happy and carefree, with no indication that anything could go wrong. The officers assured her that they would search the island thoroughly. They told Emma to stay in her hotel room while they started their investigation. It felt like the worst kind of waiting game. Sitting in that room alone, counting the hours as the minutes dragged on, Emma tried calling David's phone again, but it went straight to voicemail. Her hands trembled as she tried to control her rising panic. By the time the evening news arrived, there was still no trace of David or Lily. The police had no leads, and no one had seen them leave the hotel. It was like they had disappeared without a trace. The hotel's security cameras were reviewed, but there was nothing suspicious. No signs of a struggle, no unusual behavior. The images showed nothing more than a normal, happy family walking around the hotel just the day before. The authorities couldn't provide any answers, so Emma began to fear the worst. She had no idea what could have happened to them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going on. The officers, too, began to seem less hopeful, though they tried to comfort her with reassurances. They promised to continue searching, but Emma couldn't help but feel helpless. The thought of losing David and Lily was too much to bear. As the days passed, Emma's life began to feel like a nightmare. The hotel became a place of eerie silence, and the once beautiful island felt like a prison. The constant search by the authorities provided no new information. They scoured the nearby beaches, searched the jungle trails, and even interviewed locals, but there was no sign of her family. Emma's calls to the police became more desperate, but every time she was told that they were still looking, that nothing had changed. It was hard to believe that her family could just vanish. There were no explanations, no clues, nothing. Only a growing sense of dread that weighed heavily on her shoulders. The hours stretched into days, and still no one had any answers. Emma could only hold on to the faint hope that somehow, somewhere, David and Lily were out there, waiting to be found. But with each passing day, that hope seemed to fade a little more. Weeks turned into months, and still, there were no answers. Emma felt as though her world had come to a complete standstill. She couldn't remember what it was like to feel normal, to laugh, to enjoy simple things. The pain of not knowing what had happened to David and Lily was unbearable. Every day felt like she was carrying an invisible weight on her shoulders, dragging her further into darkness. The investigation had stalled. The police had done everything they could, searching the island, interviewing locals, even contacting international authorities. But nothing had led them to any solid leads. The more time passed, the more the case seemed to fade into the background. Emma felt like people had started to forget. Her family and friends still tried to support her, but they didn't understand the depths of her grief. It was like they all wanted her to move on. But how could she when there was no closure, no reason for what had happened? Emma couldn't accept that David and Lily were simply gone. They couldn't be. It didn't make sense. David wouldn't have left her without a word. And Lily, their sweet, curious daughter, would never just vanish. The thought of her little girl alone somewhere terrified Emma. She couldn't stop imagining her daughter's face, wondering if Lily was scared or confused, if she was okay. Her friends and family tried to help. They told her to take care of herself, to eat, to sleep, to get out of the house. But how could she? She didn't feel like herself anymore. The pain of not knowing what had happened to her family gnawed at her every minute of the day. The days blurred together in a haze of sadness, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of David and Lily. She dreamed of them. Sometimes happy dreams, other times nightmares where she was running through dark forests, calling their names, but never able to find them. Despite the sadness, Emma tried to move forward in small ways. She threw herself into her work, burying herself in tasks that kept her mind busy. But even there, she couldn't escape the constant worry. Her coworkers tried to be supportive, but they didn't know how to approach her. They didn't know what to say, how to help. Emma didn't have the answers either. Every attempt to explain her situation felt inadequate. How could she explain that her life had been turned upside down in a single moment? How could she describe the constant ache in her chest, the never-ending fear that she might never see her loved ones again? Time didn't heal anything. It only made the questions grow louder. What happened to David and Lily? Why had they disappeared? Emma had tried every possible avenue to find them, even hiring private investigators at one point, but all her efforts felt like they were hitting dead ends. The truth seemed to be slipping further and further away, and the more she searched, the more distant it became. The media coverage had dwindled too. At first, the story had made headlines. People were shocked by the disappearance of a family on vacation, but as the weeks turned into months, the story was pushed aside. People moved on with their lives, but Emma couldn't move on with hers. She couldn't forget the two people she loved most in the world. She couldn't let go of the hope that somehow they were still out there. In the silence that surrounded her, Emma couldn't help but wonder if she would ever have answers, if she would ever see her family again. The months turned into years, and with each passing day, Emma's hope began to wear thin. She had tried everything she could think of to find answers. She spent endless hours contacting authorities, going over old files, and reading the same reports over and over. She had spoken to so many investigators, but no one had anything new to say. The investigation had become stagnant, with no new leads or discoveries to follow. At first, Emma had held on tightly to the belief that David and Lily would return. Maybe they had gotten lost or were in trouble somewhere, unable to reach out. But as time wore on, those thoughts grew more difficult to hold on to. With every new unanswered question, the weight of uncertainty became too much. The police and investigators had stopped visiting her, and the case was essentially closed. The world around her seemed to move forward, but Emma felt frozen in time, stuck in a never-ending loop of questions and fear. Her friends and family continued to try and help, but their well-meaning efforts often felt distant and disconnected. They would encourage her to move on, to start fresh, but Emma couldn't imagine doing so without the people she loved most. It felt impossible to imagine a future without them in it. Her life had been torn apart, and it seemed like no one could truly understand what she was going through. Even though people cared, they just couldn't grasp the depth of her pain. In the quiet moments of her days, Emma would think back to the last time she saw David and Lily. She would replay the memory of their laughter, their smiles, the way they had been so full of life. That image kept her going, even though she knew it wasn't enough. But that memory also reminded her of how completely they had disappeared, like shadows slipping away into the night. The quiet, everyday routines of her life now felt hollow. She had become so accustomed to waking up alone, cooking meals for one, and spending evenings in silence. Everything reminded her of what she had lost. She still kept the bedroom as it had been when they left. Lily's toys neatly arranged, her books stacked on the shelf. It felt like she was holding on to the past, refusing to let go of the small pieces of them that remained. But at the same time, Emma wasn't sure if that was healthy. She was stuck in a world that didn't make sense, a world where her family was simply gone. Over the years, the case faded from public attention. The media moved on to other stories, and people stopped asking questions about David and Lily's disappearance. The investigators stopped calling, and even the hotel where they had stayed stopped reaching out. Emma was left with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. She couldn't forget them, though. No matter how hard she tried, the longing for her family never faded. Emma had tried therapy, and at times it seemed to help. But even then, the counselor couldn't give her the one thing she needed most: answers. The feeling of being lost, of not knowing what had happened to her loved ones, remained a heavy burden on her heart. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. It started with a letter. Emma was sitting in her small kitchen, looking over some bills when the sound of the mailbox opening caught her attention. She went outside and pulled the letter from the box, not thinking much of it at first. But when she saw the strange, unfamiliar handwriting on the envelope, her heart skipped a beat. It was postmarked from an overseas location, and inside, there was a message that would change everything. Emma stood frozen, staring at the envelope in her hand. Her mind raced as she turned it over, examining the unfamiliar handwriting. Her heart pounded in her chest, unsure of what to expect. It had been so long since she had received anything that felt even remotely connected to David and Lily. The letter felt heavy in her hands, as if it contained something far more important than just a piece of paper. She slowly tore open the envelope, the anticipation building with each second. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was neat, but had a slightly rushed look to it, as if the writer had been trying to get the words out as quickly as possible. Emma felt a mix of excitement and dread as she began to read. The letter was from her daughter, Lily. Emma could hardly believe it. Her eyes blurred with tears as she read the words over and over, making sure she wasn't imagining things. The letter explained that Lily was alive and well, now an adult, and had been living with David in secret for the past 22 years. She had never been able to contact Emma before because of the dangerous circumstances they had been in. The words were difficult to process, but Emma's heart soared with relief and confusion. Lily's letter told a story that was almost impossible to believe. She described how, after the family had disappeared, David had kept them hidden in a remote part of the world. They had been forced to start a new life due to threats from people who had been after them. David had made the decision to disappear to protect both of them, believing that staying hidden was the only way they could stay safe. Emma's mind was spinning. All these years, she had wondered what happened to her family, why they had vanished without a trace. The thought that David had been protecting them all this time was overwhelming. She had so many questions, so many emotions rushing through her. Why hadn't he told her? Why hadn't they contacted her earlier? Why had it taken so long to get this message? Lily explained that she had always wanted to reach out to Emma, but the situation had been too dangerous. Every time she thought she might be able to, something else would happen to push them further into hiding. She had grown up with the knowledge that she couldn't risk revealing herself, but now, after so many years, she was finally ready to connect again. Emma read the letter several times, her hands trembling. This was the news she had dreamed of hearing, yet it also brought more questions than answers. How could they have lived all these years without her knowing? Was David still alive? Where were they now? And why hadn't they reached out sooner? There were so many things Emma didn't understand. But in that moment, all she could focus on was the fact that her daughter, the little girl she had thought was lost forever, was out there. And after 22 long years, they were finally going to be reunited. It was a moment Emma had longed for, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. She didn't know what the next steps would be, or how this new chapter of their lives would unfold, but she knew one thing for sure. After all this time, she had finally received the answer she had been waiting for. Her family wasn't lost forever. And that hope, that light, was all Emma needed to take the next step forward. Emma sat down slowly, still clutching the letter in her hands. The words felt surreal, like they couldn't possibly be real. After so many years of wondering, of searching for answers, Lily was alive. David had kept them hidden all this time, and Emma couldn't even begin to understand the depth of what they must have gone through. Her mind was flooded with questions, and her heart raced with excitement and anxiety. She read the letter again, this time focusing on the details Lily had shared. The remote place they had been living in, far from the world Emma knew, was meant to be their sanctuary, a place where they could be safe from the people who had been after them. David had made the difficult decision to protect his family at all costs. He had believed that disappearing without a trace, cutting all ties, was the only way to ensure their safety. Emma could understand his desire to keep them safe, but she couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't told her anything. Why hadn't he trusted her enough to be part of that decision? Lily explained in the letter that despite their isolation, David had done his best to give her a normal life. She had attended school in a small town, learned new languages, and even made a few friends, although she was never allowed to get too close to anyone. David had been strict about maintaining their cover. He had taught Lily how to stay low, how to avoid drawing attention, and how to live in the shadows. The two of them had been incredibly resourceful, creating new identities and moving from place to place when necessary. Emma was amazed at how strong and brave they must have been, but the fact that David had kept her in the dark for so long still weighed heavily on her heart. The letter ended with a note of hope. Lily wrote that she and David were ready to finally come forward. They had found a way to safely contact Emma, and they wanted to begin rebuilding their relationship. They didn't know what kind of life they would have now, after so many years apart, but Lily believed that it was time for them to reconnect. She said they would be waiting for Emma, and that they wanted her to come to them. Emma couldn't stop the tears from flowing. After everything she had been through, after all the pain and the unanswered questions, here was the hope she had been longing for. Her family was out there, and they wanted to come back into her life. But at the same time, Emma felt a sense of fear and uncertainty. She didn't know how to navigate this new reality. So much had changed over the years, and she was unsure of what to expect when she finally saw them again. Would David be the same man she had known? Would Lily still be the same little girl she had lost all those years ago? The next step was clear. Emma needed to find them, to see them for herself, but she didn't know where to begin. Lily had given her a location, but it wasn't much to go on. Emma would have to take a leap of faith, trust that everything she had read in the letter was true, and take the first step toward a reunion she never thought was possible. As she folded the letter and placed it carefully in her pocket, Emma knew that her life was about to change once again. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she couldn't let fear stop her from finding the family she had lost. The journey ahead would be uncertain, but it was a journey she had to take. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the letter, about Lily, about what it all meant. She kept replaying the words over and over in her mind, trying to absorb everything. There was so much to process. The years of pain and uncertainty, the truth about what David and Lily had been through, and the reality that she was finally going to see them again. But even as excitement built inside her, there was still a sense of fear. Emma didn't know how to move forward. How could she just pick up where they had left off? It had been more than 2 decades since she had last seen David and Lily. They had changed, and she had changed too. Would they still be the same people? Would there be awkwardness? Would the love she had for them still be as strong as it had been all those years ago? Emma knew she couldn't let those fears stop her. She had waited long enough. She couldn't waste any more time wondering what could happen. She had to act. With determination, she started making plans. Lily's letter had given her a location, just a few words, a name of a small town in another country. Emma knew she had to find her way there, but she didn't know the first thing about navigating the complicated world of international travel. Still, she couldn't let that stop her. She made phone calls, booked a flight, and began the process of preparing for the long journey ahead. The days leading up to her departure felt both fast and slow at the same time. Emma could hardly believe that in just a few days she would be on her way to reunite with the family she thought she had lost forever. But with each passing hour, the excitement started to outweigh the fear. The thought of seeing Lily's face again, of holding her daughter after all this time, kept her going. She pictured their reunion in her mind. Lily running into her arms, David by her side. The 3 of them together again, picking up the pieces of their broken past. At the same time, Emma's thoughts kept returning to David. What kind of man had he become? Had he been able to heal after all the years of hiding, of running? She still didn't fully understand why he had kept her in the dark, why he hadn't trusted her enough to be part of the decision. The pain of that still lingered, but Emma knew she couldn't let resentment hold her back. If she truly wanted to rebuild their relationship, she had to let go of the anger and the hurt. The day of her flight arrived, and Emma could hardly contain her excitement. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. She boarded the plane, her heart racing with anticipation. She had no idea how everything would unfold once she landed in that foreign town, but she was ready. She couldn't wait to see David and Lily again, to finally have the answers to all the questions that had been haunting her for so many years. As the plane took off, Emma looked out the window, watching the city below shrink into the distance. She was on her way, on a journey that would bring her face to face with the people she loved most in the world. And no matter what happened next, she was determined to make this moment count. The pain of the past might never fully go away, but the chance to rebuild her family was a gift she wasn't going to take for granted. The plane landed in a quiet, small town, far from the bustle of the big cities Emma was used to. As she stepped off the plane, the cool air hit her face, carrying with it the scent of pine trees and earth. The town was nothing like the places she had known, with narrow streets lined by quaint buildings, a calm atmosphere that seemed to hold the secrets of 1,000 stories. Emma felt a mix of excitement and nerves swirl inside her. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She had no idea what to expect once she reached the location Lily had mentioned in her letter. The address was simple, almost cryptic, but Emma trusted her daughter's words, and she was determined to follow them. With each step, the anticipation built up, like the calm before a storm. She couldn't help but wonder what would happen when she finally saw them. Would they embrace her with open arms, or would the years of separation make things awkward, difficult? As she walked through the town, Emma couldn't shake the sense of unfamiliarity. It was a place she'd never imagined herself in, and yet it felt strangely comforting. She felt as if this was the last place she would ever expect to find her family. And yet it was where her journey had led her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. After a while, she arrived at a small, cozy cottage at the edge of the town. There was a garden with flowers in full bloom, and the house itself looked like it had been well kept. It was almost as though time had stood still here, with nothing changing for years. Emma's heart raced faster as she approached the front door, her palms sweating, her breath shallow. She knocked gently, the sound of the knock echoing in the quiet air. Moments later, the door opened. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she saw David standing in front of her. He looked older, his hair graying slightly at the temples, but there was no mistaking his warm smile. He didn't look like the man she remembered, and yet he was still the same person in many ways. For a moment, they just stared at each other, neither of them sure of what to say. The silence between them was filled with years of separation, unspoken words, and questions that had never been answered. But then, David stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Emma. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I never meant for you to go through all of this alone." Emma closed her eyes, overwhelmed with emotion. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was real, it felt like a dream. She had so many questions, so many things to say to him. But for now, all that mattered was the warmth of his embrace, the comfort of knowing that he was here. He was alive. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, they had found their way back to each other. As she stepped back, she saw Lily standing behind David. The girl she had once known as her little girl was now a grown woman, but the familiar spark of her eyes made Emma's heart soar. They hugged, both of them holding each other tightly, tears flowing freely. "I never stopped thinking about you," Lily whispered, pulling back to look at her mother. "I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't want to keep you in the dark." Emma couldn't speak for a moment, just taking in the sight of her daughter, her heart full of both joy and sadness. The years lost between them seemed like a distant memory now, and all she could think about was the present. They had a second chance, an opportunity to rebuild everything that had been broken. As they stood together, Emma realized that no matter what had happened in the past, this moment was the beginning of something new. The pain and the questions wouldn't disappear overnight, but the love they shared was still there, stronger than ever. They had found each other again, and that was all that mattered.